Hey everybody, today I'm taking a look at 3 board games. All of these games have some kind of supply and demand mechanism involved. Now the 3 games I'm talking about are Cuba, we have Bombay, and we also have East India Companies. And these range quite a lot in terms of when they were released. Before I get into my reviews of these games, I want to give a shout out to the show's sponsor, KIENDA.co.uk, who are my go-to online retailer, and if you use the link in my show notes or the QR code, then you can get 5% off your first order. Okay, so let's start with the simplest of the 3. This is Bombay by Istari Games. 2 to 5 players, 30 to 60 minutes to play. This is a more traditional pick up and deliver style game, as you will be moving your elephant piece around this map. Try to deliver these cubes to their matching temples based on a supply and demand mechanism. The longer a certain type of resource is neglected, it'll go to the top of the list here and be worth more money to that delivering person. Now it uses an action point system where I believe you have 3 actions on your turn, which you can use to move your elephants. If you land on top of a hill, that'll cost you an extra action point. Again, you can pick up the different goods that you'll need to deliver to the temples, and you can even set up these little outposts in certain junctions in order to get some passive income as other players travel through that location, which I thought was quite a nice little touch. Now, this is very simple. It definitely doesn't overdo that pick up and deliver mechanism. That is what all this game is about, and it's almost like a my first pick up and deliver game, if you want to put it that way. Very lovely aesthetic here, wonderful production, and it really does look nice on the table. And as I said, it's a nice way to maybe introduce pick up and deliver and logistics for younger children or less experienced gamers. Now, I do feel like this game was pretty much on the rails, and the margins between what you get for delivering a good really in demand and not being in demand were quite small and incremental. So it wasn't a game with huge exciting moments or big swings of point scoring. It was very much, again, very small margins, very incremental and bitty in that respect. But it was nice. It flows nicely. It doesn't take too long. As I said, the table presence is nice, but I think you're going to outgrow this one pretty quickly if you play a lot of games. As I said, probably more appropriate for younger families and stuff like that, because there is enough game going on here in order to prioritize things and try to deliver goods just before your opponents do to get that extra point or two. But yeah, if you are an experienced gamer, I think this one isn't going to really quite cut the mustard for you, despite looking so nice. So one that I can't really recommend, at least for, again, experienced gamers, but still it does what it does well, and it's a good example of a very simple pick up and deliver game. Next up, we have East India Companies. This is a 2 to 4 player game that takes 90 to 120 minutes to play. This is more of your traditional Euro, as you are essentially trying to manage your fleet of ships in order to travel the world, get some resources and sell them to the market when the market is hot. There are quite a few things going on in this game, and I do think this game could have benefited from editing some of those things. It's quite procedural in the way that it plays out as you go from phase to phase to phase, and I think the flow is kind of disrupted because of that. Now, the game does use this kind of worker placement mechanism as you're placing your meeples on these different characters here, which will allow you to buy new ships. It will allow you to increase your dockyard, those kind of things. And I thought this was kind of surplus to requirements, because you generally go through the same motions and end up at the same point anyway. It's just which order you want to do it in. So I thought that was kind of tacked on. And the game also has this investment system where you can actually invest in other players and buy stocks and shares in other players' abilities, basically. And for me, again, I didn't think that was executed terribly well. And I thought sometimes the game was trying to be a bit too clever for its own good, and that didn't really help with the overall experience. Now, the game does use a system where you are going to be blind bidding with the ships that you've had or built up throughout the game and placing them on these different locations in order to get the goods. And then based on the initiative order or the speed of those ships, you're going to be redepositing it back to the market based on this quite a dynamic market, as not only will these cards remove basically remove goods from the market in a fixed way, but you'll also be rolling these dice, which will kind of add or subtract additional resources from the market, making either the more expensive or cheaper. And I thought that was a bit too strong of a factor in the game, because it's something like, the faster ships, you're always going to get those extra, you're going to get the initiative in order to sell back to the market when the goods are worth more money. Now, I understand that is the kind of the crux of the game, but I didn't really find it terribly exciting, and I didn't really think that the, again, incremental way of scoring was that significant, and it didn't have those big moments at all. This game actually just reminded me of a game called Francis Drake, which is quite similar in a lot of ways, where you are using a blind bidding system. And again, I think this game suffers a lot of the same fate as Francis Drake does, because this one doesn't really have any kind of engine building. It doesn't really escalate or crescendo at all. And considering this is like a 2-hour game, I think because there is no forward momentum, it feels quite stagnant, and it does outstay its welcome. Now, again, this is a game I really wanted to like, because I like the theming, I like the look of the game, and I like a lot of the concepts here, but I think the execution didn't quite work for me, and that was a shame, really, because again, I was quite excited to play it. Now, again, it does have some redeeming features, but because there are so many great Euros out there now, I don't think this one quite holds up, because it doesn't flow too nicely. Again, it takes too long, and it could have benefited from some engine building mechanism being embedded in the game. So for that reason, I can't really recommend East India Companies. And the final game I'm talking about today is Cuba by Michael Renick and Stefan Statler at Rio Grande Games. This one takes around, again, 90 to 120 minutes to play. The box says 75 to 120 minutes. This one accommodates 2 to 5 players. Now, this is one of the nicest looking board games I've ever played. Let's start off on a positive note. Very attractive. I think it's Michael Menzel artwork. Really does look fantastic. Has a traditional look, but still very beautiful. Now, this is a card-driven Euro, as you have a hand of these character cards. And you're going to be playing 4 out of the 5 cards on each of the rounds. Now, they all are pretty simple in their own right. One of them will allow you to harvest resources from these boards here. So you'll basically be placing your meeple down, and for every resource in that row or column where your meeple is, you will harvest, basically. So if you are familiar with a game called Santa Maria, and there's quite a similar mechanism in that one, which I really like. I like that, especially when it comes to the next ability, which is to buy these buildings, which will give you kind of conversion trees, different kind of rule-breaking abilities, and so on. And I like the fact that when you buy these buildings, they'll actually go on your player boards, and therefore cover up a resource that you would have been able to harvest. But that ties into the next ability, which would be to use a character to activate the buildings in a row or column. So you are constantly kind of changing your resource building engine to a building using engine, which I thought was a really nice touch. And the pacing of the game is really good, because I think there's only like 5 rounds in the game or something. So that kind of gradual turning from resources to buildings works nicely, and it doesn't seem to have that sticky moment where you can't get resources anymore. So you need to be quite careful about what you need and know when to convert them into points, aka buildings. And you also have this dynamic market on the board here. Again, supply and demand, and more resources there are there, the cheaper they'll be. The fewer there are there, the more expensive they'll be, and you can sell it to the market at a better profit. And essentially what you're trying to do is you are trying to gain these resources, then you are trying to, again, build the buildings, you're trying to send them to the ships that dock on the island, and so each ship has a certain demand of a certain type of resources, and the longer they are in this dock, the more points they're going to be worth. But there is this kind of chicken mechanism where you don't want to wait too long, because your opponents will get there before you do, and therefore they will steal that slot completely. So you want to be making sure that you strike when the iron is hot and get those goods sold. This game also has a very cool mechanism where the character that you don't use in the round will have a certain amount of voting points or voting power, which you will use to basically manipulate the game state. So each round you're going to have these 4 cards that you'll be trying to bring into power to suit you. One of them will be a taxes, where you're going to have to give up a certain amount of money. One of them is going to be a certain resource you're going to have to give up. And if you give them up, you're going to get some points. And if you give them both up, you'll get some extra points. One of them is going to be a scoring category. So it might say, you score a point for every building you've built. And of course, you want to manipulate that to benefit you and not benefit the other players. And there's even a game breaking ability as well, which will completely, throw the rules on its head. This is a very polished Euro. I think there's not really much I can criticize about it. I think it works extremely well. It's a lot of fun. But my main issue with it is that once you've seen it, you've kind of seen it. There isn't really much legs here at all. There's no incentive to come back to it after you've played it. I think you can pretty much experience the whole game after a couple of plays, which, you do want some legs in these games. You want some reason to come back to it. And I don't think this game did that very well. Now, I understand there is quite a highly rated expansion for the game, and which adds a lot more variety, which I think would probably help this game massively. Now, I haven't played it at all, so I can't testify how good that expansion is, but I think as an isolated game, I think you'll enjoy it for your initial plays, but you're going to be quickly wanting to move on to something else, despite how well it plays, how smoothly it plays, and how many good decisions there are to be made here. There's even some additional touches that I didn't mention, such as not being able to carry certain resources from round to round unless you pretty much spend your whole turn to use a resource, the warehouse action, to send your resources into safety to make sure that you can use them in future rounds. But loads of things that I like about this one, but I kind of felt like I was done once I'd finished playing it, and again, I was ready to move on, I suppose, which is a bit of a shame. But it's a difficult game to rate because, again, as a piece of designing, a game design example, it is fantastic. They should be very happy with the way this game turned out. But I think that maybe the reason this game isn't really in the zeitgeist now, isn't really being talked about, is for that lack of replayability. So for that reason, it's a very near miss, but I couldn't really recommend it because I didn't think it'd be on your shelf for very long at all. So that is Cuba. So that concludes the video. Hopefully you have enjoyed it. Sadly, nothing here I can wholeheartedly recommend, but they all definitely have their strengths and some weaknesses. But I think, again, with the glut of games out there, these ones don't quite cut the mustard, despite having some redeeming features. Now, if you have enjoyed the video, please be sure to hit like and subscribe to my channel and check out my other content too. But for everybody else, I'll see you next time on Chairman of the Board. Bye bye.